Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. You can find me, my books, and blogs on dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com. The book, Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, came out in 2020, followed by Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth, followed by Raised by These Wolves, How Family and Federal Courts Are Failing Our Children. That was last year. This year, on July 17th, 2024, Raised by These Wolves, Volume 2, Child Trafficking Through the Foster Care and Court Systems, came out as a bestseller. And feel free to buy me a coffee to help keep this podcast going. I'm very happy to have Nate Munro and Debbie Carroll on. Debbie Carroll became involved in family court injustice in 2011 when she learned about a case where two ex-husbands had ganged up against the mother of their total of 3 children. The fathers had the same attorney, and all hearings for the 2 custody cases were scheduled back to back with the same magistrate. All rulings in either case apply to both. For example, when the judge ordered supervised visitation for the child of one of the dads, the mom was automatically required to have only supervised contact with the children from the other father. This mother had no accusations of abuse or neglect or criminal history whatsoever. Debbie Carroll has attended over 200 hearings in more than 50 cases in family court and juvenile court, which are administrative courts. The distinction gives the judges and magistrates incredible power and discretion, as well as intrusion into the lives of families. Not only has Ms. Carroll witnessed heinous violations of human rights by rogue courts and judges, but also incredible damage to the children involved in these cases. Debbie has influenced positive outcomes in many cases. Also, Debbie Carroll will discuss the history of family court, CPS resistance, and provide a clarification of the memorandum of procedures and provide examples of court violations in several cases and introduce her nonprofit Consideration, which offers resources to parents using model that collaborates with attorneys. And I've got Nate Munro on as well. And he is a certified ADA advocate and father's rights advocate after being subjected to debt peonage for over a decade by child support. He was tortured by the Colorado Department of Human Services from 2015 to 2017, denying him medical care, which is a human rights violation, until his arm had to be amputated. He benefited from over 3 years of intense trauma therapy. He has been alienated for over 5 years from his son, who is an adult now. He conducted a 7-year investigation into CDHS in 10 different counties in Colorado, as well as state oversight and documented crimes by top state leadership and 2 U.S. senators. And I welcome you both to Slam the Gavel podcast. Where are we at with all of this? Boy, you both have been busy.
That's true. And Nate, feel free to join in if you have a comment to make. Yeah, I've known Nate for what, 12, 10, 11 years now. And we have a very solid community of activists in Colorado with some issues between the father's writers and the mother's writers, because a lot of the mother's writers just cannot accept, they just don't have the perspective that the other parent doesn't have more power in many of these cases.
Mhm.
And so what I have done as a result of all of the work is put together a nonprofit, and the name of my nonprofit is Consideration. I selected that name because it is a legal term meaning fair compensation. It is what you get when you pay for something. You get the object. But when the courts come in, we have an attorney for Consideration by the name of Byron Miller. He's a criminal attorney.
Mhm.
but he calls them takings. They're takings. They're taking the children. And Byron has a long history of working in uh, DNN, dependency and neglect cases, which
Okay.
is Child Protective Services, the state you live in against you, to remove your child with all of the power that they bring to bear, which is unbelievable.
Mhm.
So you can find my nonprofit at considerationnonprofit.org, all one, no spaces. That's considerationnonprofit.org. I am making a shout out for donations online. We have a donate button. It just became active within the last 30 days. And we have been funding it privately. And we've had 6 cases. We're working on the 6th one right now.
Mhm.
Um, Nate and I have been involved in 2 or 3 of them. And Nate brings a whole new dimension to what we offer. And he gets paid for doing that a little bit at the time, but we're hoping to improve that. On the consideration website, which is under construction, we already have some stuff. I have written a white paper of 30 pages long, involving the current status of Child Protective Services and the amount of funding they get. They get $16,000 a month per child that they remove and put into state custody. And parents and the children themselves, as they age out, are not aware that they are actually pawns in a Ponzi scheme.
Oh.
They are slaves from cradle to birth if they are born and taken from the mother at birth and then placed in foster home after foster home, where they end up having a record for running away and other crimes. And when they get in front of a judge as an adult, they already have a record. And then they get funding from the state. The state gets funding from the government, federal government, to lock them up.
Mm.
So I call that cradle to grave slavery. Um,
Mhm.
the other information about my nonprofit is that we are collaborative with a group by the name of Face Us, Families Against Court Embezzlement and Unethical Standards. They're ahead of us on the technology, but we are collaborating. The board, the head of Face Us, one of the heads, is one of our board members, and um, she has tons of IT experience, as does Nate, as does our executive director. And so we're going to be coming really more visible. And hopefully, we've created something that will endure past my lifetime.
Mhm.
Um, the next thing I wanted to mention is just a little bit of the history of the movement from my perspective. Um, and you already told the story of my friend Stacy, who she was so furious and traumatized by not having her children, because when they took the custody away from one of the dads, they took him away from her and the other dad. Her case at the time I met her was 11 years old.
Mm.
And it continued and it continued until we came up with the ransom money, and we addressed the child support arrears that the court had placed on her.
Oh.
So child support is always weaponized. It's used in the family courts, and it's also allotted in CPS courts, where parents who are completely indigent still have to pay child support to have their kids taken away from them and locked up.
Mhm.
And one of the biggest resources that I have ever found is Daniel Hatcher. He wrote a book called The Poverty Industry: The Exploitation of America's Most Vulnerable Children. And I have another whole podcast about that story, about what he revealed in that, if you're interested.
Mhm.
But when I met Stacy, she belonged to a group called Mothers of Lost Children. There was also Phyllis Chesler's book Mothers on Trial, that had been written in the 1970s. And
Mm.
that is when they started. It was really when divorce became no fault. That is when this whole uh, assault regime by the courts began. And what they did is they would take contested court cases between a husband and a wife, and they would weaponize one of the parents.
Mhm.
Both parents could be fighting, but even the family court attorneys even the good ones were limited in what they could do and what they could bring by the judge. And I need to mention that magistrates in Colorado and other states are not judges. They are beyond reach. They cannot be cited under judicial discipline. Only the judges that the magistrates are assigned to, they are the ones that are accountable for the magistrates, and they overlook all kinds of stuff. As I said, they're administrative courts, not criminal courts.
Mhm.
And therefore, um, that's, I call that the rule of maritime law, where the captain of the ship was the only one who could dispense justice on the ship until they reached land. Well, that's what the magistrates are doing. The types of violation you're going to hear about, I hear you have an upcoming podcast coming up on October 20th, and that mom is going to fill you in on, I mean, I'm sure your books cover the violations that magistrates perform, but mothers of lost children, um, I, I, um, I have a note here. Mostly what happens in family court and in child protective. So I wanted to talk about the history of the difference between family court and CPS, and also the mother's and the father's rights from my perspective.
Mhm.
I was the voice that called Connie Valentine, who founded Mothers of Lost Children, and said to her, what do we think about child protective services? I didn't know that much about it. And she said, oh, we don't deal with that. They're the mafia. And I have since come to find out that the family court is more of the mafia, because CPS at least has guidelines that are legislated and that must be followed, even though
Mhm.
the outcome is that 90% of the cases in my county, Jefferson County, the children are removed. 90% of cases where people can call in neighbors, relatives who are angry and turn the
Mhm.
parents in, 90% are removed. So how much protection is that mafia?
Mhm.
Well, the family court mafia is even worse.
Mhm.
And um, that comes down to uh, when I cross over between family court and CPS, there's very, very many crossovers. But the other issue that I have seen in the historical stuff that I have done is that the parents, the fathers, writers have a very strong um, um, block, BLOC, and they have very good networking now because of the internet. And they have specializing attorneys who specialize in fathers' rights.
Mhm.
And one of the things I mentioned to these fathers when I talk to them, yeah, you have gotten screwed by the child support and by um, the tender years doctrine that was giving mothers their children up until the 60s, when the divorces became no fault and this thing just busted wide open.
Mhm.
Yes, you have been. And my heart bleeds for you, because you are just as powerless as the mothers are when the court protects pedophiles who get the children in custody. In general, what I have witnessed over and over is that the courts give the children to the most dangerous setting, whether it be a psychological parent who is not related to the child, whether it be to one or either of the parents who is a drug addict, who has drugs around, who has strangers in the home, who are out of commission because of their wastedness.
Right.
Um,
Right.
CPS will return children if there is a real investigation that they're doing. They give the children back to those parents. Our government even has a prison to parenting funding stream
Oh.
through the Fatherhood Initiative. So, what in my observation of the mothers versus the fathers, I have seen cases where neither parent in a custody battle has an attorney, but they have a Fatherhood Initiative representative for the dad and a VAWA, Violence Against Women Act representative, both receiving federal dollars to stand there and help the judge to fight over the children and to continue the same stuff that would happen as if there were an attorney.
Right.
So that issue
Mhm.
is one where I reach out to the dads and tell them about the real bottom line of what is going on with trafficking. The trafficking of children, every single case matters to these judges. every single case. They are throwing everything at these cases, every resource, every way of bulking up the costs, of bankrupting the family. They will even take your IRAs, your retirement accounts. They will make you sell your home in order to pay for attorneys. They will throw you in jail, not because you haven't paid your child support, but because a contempt of court has been issued against you, which now makes you a criminal because you're not paying your child support. But they've added this layer so they can have even more hearings and generate more money for the courts. It's all about the money. But the
Right.
message I bring to the fathers is, if your ex-wife has a boyfriend who is sexually assaulting your children or hitting your children under the doctrine of putting the children in the most dangerous home, you are just as powerless. And we need to come together to fight the memorandum of procedures, which is my next topic. The memorandum of procedures, I looked up this morning and tried to find it. They have blocked it time and time again. This is what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 15-page long document, and it is a case management for dependency and neglect cases under CPS. And it has all of the deadlines and all of the procedures, and the caseworkers follow it, and sometimes they'll show the parents. But what they do not show the public, and what they are hiding, is contested cases. I'm going to read it to the public and to your listeners, because in the past, I was able to tell people, look up memorandum of procedures, dependency and neglect. Look up, if you have any questions regarding the memorandum of procedures, please contact Dawn Hall or Melinda Taylor at 303-861-1111. Nowhere can you reach anybody at all,
Oh,
except for the Office of Respondent Parent Counsel, which validates what they call volume 7. And I'm going to read this much of volume 7 to you right now.
okay.
Concurrent permanency planning cases. Number 1, types of cases. Uncontested cases in which at least one parent has appeared, expressed a desire to work toward reunification, and agree to a treatment plan, but certain risk factors are present that suggest reunification may not be successful. Risk factors include history of prior involvement with DSS or HSS for similar issues, history of severe physical abuse or habitual pattern of physical abuse toward child or sibling, history of sexual abuse where the perpetrator is in denial, chronic substance abuse, adolescent parent functioning at a low level, etc. The two key factors in that are a history of similar issues, which means that if the current parent or set of parents has ever had exposure to foster care, or a sibling has ever had an exposure, or a parent, an aunt, a stepsister, an uncle, a grandfather, or anybody in their entire family, there is a risk automatically to the parents. They're on the search. They have what they call money funding for maintenance of efforts. That is money that is used to continue to surveil the family until the youngest child reaches 19. So any juvenile case, any report by a school, anything, any relative, they won't give the children back. There's the preponderance of evidence factor leans against those parents getting their kids back. But the most troubling aspect of it is that they return children to a parent with a history of sexual abuse against the child as long as the parent admits it. These courts are all about admitting. Throw yourself on the rack. Allow yourself to denigrate yourself, violate your own constitutional right, to not testify against yourself. Write clarification letters admitting to your children. If you want to see your children, you have to admit,
Oh,
I forgot my charger. Let me go and charge it. See if Nate wants to say anything.
okay.
All right. My name's Nate Munro. I'm a certified ADA advocate. As you were saying, Marianne, I also run the PALADN Parental Support Group, and PALADN stands for Parental Alienation and Legal Abuse Defense Network. So we're basically a grassroots organization for families who have been targeted and abused by the Department of Human Services and Family Courts. We're based mainly in Colorado, but we have 6 or 7 members now that are out of state and other states. We even have an international member too. So we're growing in lots of different ways.
Mhm.
And we offer support through mutual aid, sharing resources, and partnering with other members to as advocates for different targeted parents. So we take some of our alumni who have graduated through the process or at least survived their end of it
Oh,
and
yeah.
pair them up with folks that are currently being destroyed or tortured by it. As Debbie was saying, the system here in Colorado is definitively like a mafia. Quite honestly, to play on a point that Joe Williams had made on your podcast before, I'm sure you remember this too, Attorney Joe Williams, when he was making the point that the United States is a corporation uh, and not an actual country, depending on how you want to look at it legally. We see that it's all it takes to be a mafia is a organization that's run illegally. Well, this whole thing is illegitimate and doesn't run by any laws. There is no rule of law in Colorado or in the United States, frankly,
Mhm.
because we have like a 4-tier justice system. And people often say 2-tier justice system. Well, actually, it's 4 because you have the government, which is protected by qualified immunity, so you won't ever be able to prosecute them. You have the elites who are above prosecution because they have too much money to be able to prosecute. You have the working class that's subjected to the rules of the land. And so the laws are basically only for the working class
Yeah.
because by the time you hit the 4th tier where you're in prison, you have no rights.
Right.
So like it's not even the same there. So like we actually have this 4-tiered system where it's really laws are only applicable against the 3rd tier, meaning the working class or the people.
Mhm.
And you have this whole system set up to just protect these psychopaths who are in control. And I'll just start here because like I'm gonna come across this over and over. I've coined the term in my investigations institutional psychopathic groupthink, and I use that term because we find the same type of social structure forming in all kinds of different aspects of American life, but you see it definitively happen in the Department of Human Services, and it's very obvious there because we're right where the rubber meets the road, right? We're in the trenches fighting the battle every day, and you can really see it when they're ripping parents away from their kids for absolutely no reason, like we were talking about in the Jamie Logan case that's coming up on the 20th with your podcast as well.
Mhm.
So we'll get into that more then, but that's those case specifics. But that was playing back on what Debbie was saying about the magistrates are just completely out of control because we have a real problem one up in Boulder County,
Mhm.
who's actually been a problem for quite a few of the different PALADN members. I want to say that just to my accreditations for ADA advocacy and stuff. I've received specialized training beyond my certification from top national and local disability attorneys here in Colorado and ADA experts around the country, including master classes by the Rocky Mountain ADA and the Amputee Coalition. So I'm pretty well on top of it. I'm not perfect and I don't know everything, but I've done my part to learn most everything that we'll need to know, at least as far as the battleground goes here in the family courts and child custody. Um, so I've personally investigated and documented crimes and human rights abuses in 10 different counties in Colorado. I'm sure Debbie has more than that. This is just what I've personally been able to document in the PALADN documentation. But I can say as a whole, the state is a failed state by definition. And just for the listeners to understand, so I'm not throwing around accusations that we're not backing up, a failed state, by definition, requires two factors. It requires a failure to safely provide basic services, and that would be like human services, but can also include food, water, and housing, effective disaster relief. I mean, the country's just a disaster right now.
Yes.
And fair elections could be added to that too. We'll see that in another month here with the election coming up. But like, so failure to provide basic services, that's one part of it. And then a failure to provide a fair judicial system, where if you've got a 4-tier judicial system and it's backed up by no rule of law, like we're completely off the charts there too. And these are, once again, like you were saying, Marianne, these are points established by the UN for human rights. And they just don't apply here in America, or the US, I should say, just because we pay for everything in the UN and then we get special rights out of it. Once again, that's not even that's a 2-tier justice system there too, right?
Right. Right. And debtors prison was abolished in 1833, but they're still putting people in there willy-nilly.
Well, child support itself is a debt peonage also. And I know you were subjected to one end of this whole thing, but I actually have a video of the director of child support here in Colorado saying that he looked into the worksheets they use for child support, and they found out nobody nobody earning less than $40,000 per year could even afford it, and it was causing debt peonage to every single one of those folks. Well, that's 60% of the country at this point.
Oh, man.
So that's the majority of people are going to be subjected to debt peonage if you're part of child support alone. So that it's baked into the cake once again. And we'll get into other examples where they admit it openly. Now that's the problem, is they used to have the decency to lie to us about this stuff, and now they don't even go that far. Now they are so confident about the corruption and so arrogant about it, they do very sloppy things and just let it hang out there, because they are not worried about being held to account because of qualified immunity. And they've got another term here in Colorado called quasi immunity that they use for state contractors. They've got qualified immunity for state employees, but then anybody contracted like a PRE or a CFI or any of these other court officials that would come in. A PRE is parental responsibility evaluator, and CFI is child and family investigator. But it applies to all different types of things, including a lot of the private attorneys that help under the Office of Respondent Parents Counsel. That's the department in Colorado that helps with parents who are indigent and can't afford an attorney. They assign one of these crooked, bad faith actors to your case, who then throws you under the bus and works behind the scenes to destroy your case for you. This would also include GALs too, the guardian ad
Oh, yeah.
litems. And I'm sure you're well aware of how that's a racket too.
Right.
Which
These
by-
are third-party parasites.
By the way, the
Yes.
guardians ad litem that the court appoints work for the Supreme Court in Colorado. They are part of they're paid by the Supreme Court of Colorado, and so are the ORPCs. So the Office of Respondent Parents Council also gets its funding through the Supreme Court of Colorado.
And not to put it back on a national level, but our Supreme Court already made national news this year by trying to kick Trump off the ballot. I'm not even a Trump supporter necessarily, but I think all parties should be able to be on the ballot and he's a former president. If they can do that to him, what are they doing to the little people?
That's right.
And that's the Supreme Court in Colorado. So the fish rots from the head down. And
They
and I've
commissioned the memorandum of procedures. This is their document. It's right on so I looked up this was one thing I was going to finish up with. I've been looking for this now. Not only has this been cleaned up, erased, but my entire podcast of 2 years called The Fourth Branch, and particularly my podcast called The Fourth Branch Rebroadcast Psychological Parent Laws, which has had over 2 million hits. They have AI'd the name of it, and I found it's called Psychological Rebroadcast Laws. And they did an AI sweep of what my podcast said in its introduction that was published. And so they're trying to wipe it out, and I'm trying to find it because I know I saved it to multiple places, and I just got to spend the time to go look for it.
Jeez. And who would have thought that was going to happen?
I did, because when I published in 2012, I published a 2008 report by the Colorado, the just the general media. And in the report from the Department of Human Services to the legislature, they reported that mandated monthly visits by caseworkers had a success rate of 14%. And I went and published it in the Denver Post. Next thing you know, that whole report has been replaced by a different report for 2008. They had like an alternate all ready to go. They took it out. That was in 2012. So I've been being censored by the powers that be for what I publish ever since I started. And that's why I don't have a Facebook page right now, but I'm gonna get one back soon.
The censorship is, and the hiding of the facts of the trafficking is what's very concerning.
It's all about trafficking. The whole powers that be, they will hold wars. I mean, that's where trafficking started. It started with wars. It started with, to the victors go the spoils, and the spoils included the women and the children as slaves. And by the way, when you talked about the 4 tiers of the social economic spectrum, the 4.5 is the foster care class. They are not working class. They very barely can keep on jobs. They barely have transportation. They set them free without, they set them loose without driver's licenses, which we got changed in the whole legislative time that I didn't even mention that stuff. But they're the poor that are right between, like I call it foster class warfare is what I have named it. And that was in my 911 tape when the deputy knocked me to the ground and took me to the psych ward. So I still have the 911 tape. They couldn't steal that from me. They did doctor it. I have the altered version. Anyway, there you go, Nate. Go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
Well, that's a good point for all the parents out there. Make sure you make your own copies of everything. Don't just rely on an internet link, because these are unscrupulous folks. They will go out and do whatever they need to do to make sure that you don't get your way with things, because they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars normally in any one of these cases to trying to secure these children. Debbie was getting to it before, like in CPS, there's a huge amount of money to be made. I know people have been finding out about the Title 4D and 4E subsidies that people can collect from Social Security. I shouldn't say people, the department collects through Social Security. And this actually adds up very quickly. Just they make 10 cents on the dollar for child support payments. Every time I pay like $1 of child support, the state's going to make 10 cents back as a subsidy. But they make so much more money under CPS. So this goes back to the point of why they want to always separate the kids from the parents. And to Debbie's point, like they basically want to give the kids to the most unstable parent possible, because they know statistically there's a good chance that that kid is going to have problems in that house that's unstable. And then where does the kid go? The kid goes into foster care. And that's the ultimate goal. And there's a financial incentive behind it. I want to push back one little part on Debbie, because we discussed numbers before with CPS's earnings, and the number that's used for $16,000 per month is actually based on the appreciation of the amount of money from $14,600 in 2016 in Daniel Hatcher's book, which we referenced, but had only been it was a 2022 number. When you take the 2024 numbers, it's actually $19,000 per month now.
Per
And when
child.
you
They
per
love
child per
multiple
month.
group families. They get that a family of 5 equates to $1 million a year. The state gets,
And it
and
may be more. It
they
may be more
use
now,
the
Debbie.
money. Well, my figure includes as well all of the grants and all of the special things like the Human Trafficking Commission. They get that funds in every state. Some of the job skills, that's part that is focused on transitions, kids
Mhm.
transitioning out of foster care. And by the way, I'm going to mention that we had an update to the CPS laws, and they were talking all about transitions, but they were not talking about transitions um, between foster care and living outside. They were talking about transitions of gender. So,
Mhm.
as people must be aware, I think most people should know by now, the Child Protective Services is removing children from parents if the parent does not actively support and encourage the gender transitioning. And that is happening everywhere.
Mhm.
And I know Massachusetts has cases of it, Washington, Colorado, Nebraska. I mean, we could definitely, if we had the time to look it up, every single state has done that. CPS has done it.
California too is the leader in that, right? They're trying to
Mhm.
criminalize it and they're calling it child abuse if you don't go along with the gender
Right,
transition in the school that they may not even tell you is happening. That's the
right.
other
Schools are not
problem, right?
required to tell you that your child is coming in and they're providing a change of clothes to match their gender. They are calling them by different names. They are allowing them to use the opposite gender's bathroom. All this stuff is happening and the parent doesn't even know it, changing pronouns, everything. Um, but they're actively supporting uh, the children, which if you have any knowledge about child psychology or about the development of gender identity, it changes. It changes as the child reaches puberty and gets more confidence in life.
Mhm.
And so a lot of these kids have lacked confidence, self-esteem, and they think this is a fix.
Mhm.
So that's that part. What else, Nate?
Well, this goes back to the point that the whole effort there is to undermine parents' rights in
Mhm.
most of this. It's to take the rights away from the parents and put it in the hands of the nanny state, basically. So they're trying to say that, like, the school knows better than you as a parent, and you don't even get the right to know about it. And because of that, you just don't have any right to make decisions about your children. And it used to be a point like they would wait until a child is over 12 years old before they were able to make any decisions about where they lived, like which with parent. And so to make a decision like I completely want to change my entire life on a chemical basis, and this is not to take away from trans people wanting to do that. That's one thing and a personal choice, but
Mhm.
should work within the realms of logic at some point, because like what they're putting the cart in front of the horse by giving the
Right.
kid the ability to make these decisions. And quite honestly, these are bad decisions at this point because the NHS in Europe has already declared that this is bad science.
Ah.
Like the drugs and the therapies used don't create good results. There's psychological issues like what Debbie's already cited, but there's also issues with the drugs themselves. And in the
Mhm.
United States, we're so completely compromised. I liken this whole argument to a lot of what they do with the SSRIs, the antidepressants, who those have proven to not have any scientific merit behind them by the recent studies too, because it wasn't actually addressing chemical brain issues, and it doesn't really provide results because like in the United States, we take more antidepressants than any other country on earth,
Oh,
but
yeah.
we're also one of the least happy places on the planet.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
we're
just
kind of
obvious they
numbed.
don't work.
We're numbed into
Pardon me?
not taking action. That it's
Mhm.
very, we're very sedated. Should we launch into a little bit about the case in El Paso County right now, since we're talking about? So I want to go on the record here saying that I don't have anything against transgender people. I don't. Uh, when I look at transgender people, I kind of feel sorry. Um, it's like, wow, because I am blessed to not
Mhm.
question my gender. I have bigger problems to deal with.
Mhm.
And to me, you know, having that being at peace with that is really, really important. But I don't know that the solution is, you know, genital mutilation of children,
Mhm.
to justify how wonderful this new life is. But we have a case. You think we should talk about it, Nate?
Feel free.
Well,
Yeah, go where you
I
need to.
want to talk about our collaborative approach and what seems to be working, with the nonprofits working, joining forces together, and having eyes and kind of a reputation. So, um, what I mean, Nate suggests things like the parent can write his own treatment plan, and we can file an emergency motion for this, or we can have the attorney file an emergency motion for this. He sees a lot of the kind of the document aspect of things, whereas my specific skill is being able to just know when the violations are occurring, and also to build a relationship with the parents.
Mhm.
Um, the one parent or the both parents, mostly it's one parent at a time, because in the divorces it's one, but even in CPS, it's rarely the family is intact,
Mhm.
with both parents. But we have a case that is so obviously broken that we feel very strongly that we're going to win, and if not win, we're going to win on appeal. We basically, the father and mother got divorced after 18 years of marriage.
Mhm.
At the time, um, the mother had married very young, and she had a baby when she got married, and her husband adopted the baby. And and on the advice of this girl's dad, she was 16 when she got married. Um, they 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 raised they got married and raised the first child. She didn't have any more children until she was 21, and then she had 4 more children in the next 10 years. So they were married 18 years. But as a very young married woman, and kind of sort of a marriage that was kind of engineered, sort of, I wouldn't say it was arranged. She participated in it fully, um,
Mhm.
and obviously was happy for a long time. But
Mhm.
she started straying, and she got in with the wrong crowd. She got into drugs,
Mhm.
and her husband divorced her. And she happened to have a sister who had a former CPS caseworker. These are the most dangerous people in the world.
Mhm.
They know how to tap into the mafia that is CPS.
Mhm.
They know how to get the kids away from the parents, and they get them into their custody, and then they go and then they open the case. And that's what happened in this case. And this aunt helped the mother, and then the oldest daughter, that was the adopted one, became part of this little trio of women who were hell bent on getting the children away from the dad. The dad is a very devout um, believer, and
Mhm.
he pretty much raises his children in an environment, homeschools them, teaches them the biblical methods of solving problems and biblical discipline.
Mhm.
He does never hit his children, ever, never once, but he's very involved. In fact, he's been accused of excessive parenting. Well, so the aunt and the mom and the sister, the trio, got the oldest girl to voluntarily want to go live with them, and the mother. And the mother has a boyfriend. I don't know when he came into the picture,
Mhm.
but the oldest girl. So, should I say his name? Did I say his name already? The dad's name?
I don't think you did.
Okay, well, let's just call him R.
Okay.
So R agreed to the oldest girl moving in with her aunt and her mother, and then they talked the second girl into coming. So now the three girls are living with the mom. And about a year later, they kept trying to come get the boys, the two younger boys. They try and take them out for ice cream or take them to the park, and dad always went with them. He knew something wasn't right at this point. Um, and so they ended up one day tricking the dad into going out the front door while the mother and the sister had parked behind the fence in the backyard, and they smuggled the boys out and straight to CHS, CPS, DHS, and um, they put the dad in jail. They created an accusation against the dad, and he went straight to jail for 11 days. So when they took the kids and he called the police, he's the one that got arrested. Isn't that the way these things go?
Right.
Mandatory
Right.
arrest is the one that calls, right? The innocent one. And so after 11 days, they changed caseworkers. Very common tactic. They changed the caseworkers. There's no hearing set up. Nothing's going on. They give them an ORPC, respondent parent lawyer, and nothing's happening. And after like 3 months, they decide to let the boy stay in the custody of his mother, who
Hmm.
is living with a known sex offender. And our attorney, Byron, says that they knew it at the time they placed him. So right there, we have a lawsuit. The boy was then sexually, his hands were tied, and the entire experience, including breaking his leg, his wrist, his ribs, kicking him in the stomach, hitting him about the head and neck, and also at some point standing on pins. They weren't quite nails, they were like little nails,
Mhm.
standing on them for hours at a time. He was lost all kinds of weight, and they sexually assaulted him, gave him some drugs, were
Mhm.
found in his system, and the mother and sister live streamed the assault.
Mm.
So the the boyfriend got out on 50,000 bond that I'm saying the porn industry paid for.
Mhm.
The mother went to jail for a little while, and she got out on probation, which she violated in a massive fail within a month, including contact with a minor. We don't know which minor it was, including alcohol abuse, contact with the perpetrator, the boyfriend. Totally failed. In the meantime, R has not ever seen his children.
Mm.
They never created any supervised visitation, any opportunity, and they are the only people reporting to the judge that the children now don't want to see their father, and 2 of them are transitioning their genders.
Oh.
And then on top of it, ours 2 therapists that were court appointed reported they never saw a treatment plan. The
Mhm.
father said he's never seen the treatment plan. So we now have a violation on the visitation, which is mandated that the parents, if you commit murder, you get to see your children.
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
you're fighting for them because you love them and you took good care of them and you got duped by masterful mafia kidnappers, you don't get to see your children.
No.
So this is the status of the case. They had a termination of parental rights, and the mother voluntarily terminated her rights. She had another appearance after she violated probation, and they sentenced her to 4 years to life, which is the indeterminate sentence for sex offenders in the state of Colorado. In other words, we're going to keep you until we think you're ready to go back out there. We're going to, and when you're out there, we're going to follow you for the rest of your life by mandatory lie detector tests. So it's a racket. It's all a racket. The definition of a racket is to create a problem from which the entity benefits financially. That is CPS.
Is that,
That is the courts.
did they put her into a guardianship?
The mother?
Yeah.
Heck no.
Hmm. Mhm.
No, they only put mothers in guardianships when they want to take away their ability to sign off on their own divorce decrees, their own divorce settlements. That's why they put mothers in guardianships. I have experience with that as well.
Mhm.
So, Nate, did I leave any? Okay, so the status is the mother was given that, and the father has had 2 different. The second hearing, we showed up there. Nate and I and other court watchers drove from Denver to Colorado Springs, and we're funding the attorney in this matter because there's no other relief at this point. The nonprofit is funding that. It's not the only thing, and it's dire need when we go to the situation of paying for attorneys.
Oh.
we've tried all the other things, and that's where the collaboration comes in, making court. So I've also been in the standing to be a supervised visitation and transporter in another case out of Adams County. That's the kind of stuff that we do. We provide court watch. We provide try to get away from the cottage industry. I know
Mm-hmm.
there's federal dollars for these supervised
Oh.
visitation people who
Mm-hmm.
bring the kid to a supervised visitation, and then they have to go to the bathroom, and they let the dad take the child outside, or the mom take the child outside of the place, and it's too hot, and so they have gaps in their service
Mm-hmm.
provision.
Mm-hmm.
But the
Debbie,
money,
that's subjective because that can change from case to case. Because I know when I was put through the supervised parenting time, I wasn't allowed to do anything. And there was an issue where my son had a, a UTI, and he was just a little kid and he had some issues. And I, as the dad, should have been the one to be like, dude, this is how you take care of this whole thing or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But they wouldn't let me even in the bathroom. It created, and it happened at his mom's house just because his mom wasn't helping him clean his privates
Mm-hmm.
because he was a little kid at the time. He was like 4. And I wasn't even in there. I'd already been separated from him. This was prior to when I was alienated ultimately, but they'd taken several stabs at doing that.
they're all
Debbie,
every single performer switches sides based on what the goal is.
Mm-hmm.
They predetermine who's going to get the kit, and they're going to do anything they can, and they'll play a game, as they did in the case you're going to be bringing up in later this month, of letting the mom take the children for a year to another state to go to school, and that then retrieving them using law enforcement and
Wow.
filing kidnapping charges, or saying they're kidnapping charges, but nobody knows really what they were or who even ordered those charges. You're going to find out. So tons and tons of people involved. I have sat in a court case where a 12-year-old mother in a foster group home had a baby with a 13-year-old father, and they had 50 state people in the courtroom because they gave attorneys to the parents of the girl in foster care, knowing they'll never get the baby
Mm-hmm.
because they don't even have their own kid. Gave
Oh.
attorneys to both of the parents of the boy,
Mm-hmm.
attorney guardian ad litem for the girl, attorney guardian ad litem for the boy, attorney guardian and ad litem for the infant. Right there's like 8 attorneys, plus the city attorney, the county attorney, the representative of Rocky Mountains Children's Law Center. You know, you've got at least 12 to 15 court officials involved,
Mm-hmm.
counting the
Mm-hmm.
lawyers. Then you have the caseworkers and the caseworker managers and the trauma bond specialists and the PREs and the family investigators. And there were 50 people in that courtroom. I was taking a picture. They tried to take my phone. I cited the Supreme Court ruling. I got to look it up. I cited you can't take my phone without a warrant,
Mm-hmm.
and they gave me my phone back. They did not. I mean, I didn't even give it to them. I didn't allow them to destroy my picture, my video of all the people in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another kind of collaborative, outside the box thing, is showing up in the courtrooms. It's so important. That these judges are getting more and more flagrant, because I think they know. I think they know that the government is going to change one way or another. We're going to change this government. It's it's out of control. It's bipartisan. At some point, it was bipartisan. That's changing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the collaborative efforts that we make, where we think outside the box. We um, we don't violate the laws. We don't go to the foster parents' homes. We don't name where the children are. We have to be careful. We have demonstrations in front of the courthouses, parades, marches. We've done all kinds of things. I have a banner, and since I'm so bad with technology, I didn't send you. That's the picture I wanted to send you, Marianne, was the banner. It's the
Oh.
CPS and Family Court Kidnapped Children, and it's a yellow and black crime scene banner, and it's 30 feet long. We've
Mm-hmm.
unfurled it in the state capitol. We've smuggled it in. Helena Topa and I smuggled it in. She smuggled it in. And I had had a dream that we were doing that. And then right after that, the movie Amerigeddon came out, where you know, Alex Jones, the question, the very controversial guy, but that was before Sandy Hook happened, and Armageddon came up, and he was testifying to Congress, and that was like us, Helena and I, standing with the banner, hanging it over the gallery railing on the third floor of the Colorado House of Representatives chambers while they were in full session, after they had just finished a child care law, so they could get more children into state-run child care, so they could look for bruising and statements by children, so they could go after more parents. That's everybody doing this is can change teams, change sides, change names. You can be the county attorney in one case, guardian ad litem in the next, and PRE in the next.
Well, they have specific folks they like to work with in order to receive
Mhm.
certain results. That's the whole name of the game with corruption.
And that's
Debbie,
throughout the whole setup.
I want to bring us back to one other point that you just made about this child being a product of the foster care, where you have a 12-year-old mother and a 13-year-old father, and all of a sudden now there's this infant. This just brings up the question: what happened to that kid?
I call that breeding in captivity.
I get you, but what happened to the kid?
I don't know.
He is
I don't know.
trafficked. He or she was trafficked, right?
I mean, because it takes 2 years. They maximize, and then COVID might have come up at that time. It was before COVID though. It takes them, they get 24 months to collect the 16, 19,000, however much, even more than that. If they come in over the border, I heard they're getting way more money. It's just a rumor. I don't know. I can't prove it. A lot of this stuff you can't prove, and even Daniel Hatcher couldn't prove it. He even says in his book, it's really hard to track the money, the amount of money going into this. I believe it's like the backbone of our domestic economy. That's what I think. Our courts are running our lives, and they are. That's where I am.
Mhm.
It also,
Right. Well, to go back to the point we were making before, Debbie, about how much money they
Mhm.
make at $19,000 a year
a
per
month,
each kid per
a month,
month. That actually works out to $9 billion a month. And
and
then
there,
if you go to the year, it's 109 billion a year. It's
yeah.
an extreme
Maria
amount of
talks
money, and think
about.
how much that would make difference for people.
And don't forget, we need to mention that money comes out of the Social Security Administration. Title
Right.
4D is foster care and elderly indigent nursing care. And that's child support. Title E is the foster care and elderly indigent nursing.
Mhm.
That money is being paid to those lawyers in those courts by the Social Security Administration. It is on the verge of bankruptcy, right?
Mhm.
Do you know that's where your money's going?
That's
That's
why.
Ugh.
Well, see, and the real problem with that is that Social Security money that's in the Social Security Trust Fund, earned by every person's Social Security contributions through your taxes. So we're taking the pool of the money from the public, basically, and now we're pumping it. It's a money laundering scheme. We're pumping it back through Department of Human Services, and $109 billion a year. And this also ties in, I know this is going to get down some other rabbit holes, but this also brings up the immigration problem as well, because not to play too much importance on Alex Jones, but he started making the point that uh, the families that are separated at the border, all the children are taken away from their parents, whether they showed up with parents or they were all alone and the parents abandoned them to have a better life in the United States. They're then
Mhm.
apprehended, and those children are taken and put into the foster care system. That actually feeds into that number of $109 billion a year. And I'm just using the number of 320 lost children that I saw recently. I believe it was a New York Post. It was either New York Post or New York News
335,000.
article. Yeah, it's, well,
335,000.
I was working with the term with the number of 320,000 that they listed in there, but it's basically the same. I'd broken that number down, since that was a number that was over the last 3 years of the Biden presidency. I'd broken it down to thirds, basically, to add into the calculator to come up with the $109 billion a year. But there's 369,000 kids domestically in the foster care system, and approximately 120, 110,000 or so are coming from immigrant families also. So this is like a time and a third the damage. They're adding on an extra 33% basically onto the issue by pulling in these immigrant folks. So
Mm.
the whole thing with forcing the immigrants, and I don't want to be punching down on the immigrants, they're tools in this whole thing being used by the mafia state. That's the
Mhm.
problem.
Mhm.
Well,
But
you know,
it's very complex and very wide reaching. Sorry, Debbie, go ahead.
we're going so global here, that, okay, so the original number that, Cheryl Rowe does testified to Congress. I'm not sure if I have her name right. Testified to Congress, in October, that, there's a clearing center facility for children in California that's getting $200 million a month. So our figures are way lower. However, we can't, you know, that, so if they're taking all these kids putting in foster care, some people are like, oh, isn't that a good thing that they're not being, picked up by complete strangers who sponsored them and are just handing over money to sponsor them to the cartel that's bringing the children up? Um, the Well, no, it's not, because
Mm.
now they got to pay off the CPS people too.
Oh.
So it's it's so mind blowing. People shut down, and I don't want people to shut down. I want people to think of what they can do, because if we can bring this home, um, to people, there's this whole world. People go to church and they sing, and they don't want to know about, like, who's in your church. Do you have anybody in your church going through a custody battle? Is that custody battle clean or dirty? Do
Mhm.
you have anybody in your church who has a disabled children who's been placed into a residential treatment center? That brings me to El Pueblo Residential Treatment Center. These quasi governmental entities are the next place they're putting the kids.
Oh,
They're not
yeah.
just putting them in foster homes. They're not. The United States government is running the largest adoption ring ever,
Mhm.
except maybe China, where they arrested 35,000 people in China trafficking kids. And I don't know how much of that goes through the government,
Well,
because,
go ahead.
go ahead, you go ahead.
Well, while they're trafficking these children, they're trafficking the parents through the Title 4D funding. So they're getting billions of dollars a year out of these states, each state. So where is all this money going, really?
It's going to, um, I mean, if you look at the nonprofits, most of them are supporting the foster care system.
Mhm.
So what's going there? Like, where's the money? Um,
Mhm.
it's the
Well, that's
$1,000 a
easy to
month.
answer, actually. That's
Go
easy
ahead.
to answer because DHS collects the money every month. So the $19,000 per month per child comes into DHS. Okay.
The
Then
state.
DHS doles out $500 to $2,000 to a foster parent to raise the children. And then they keep the rest. Then the question is, where does that money go? Then it goes to the NGOs, like what Debbie's talking about, or the nonprofits, private contractors, all kinds of things. The Department
The
of Human
courts,
Services, though,
the
definitely
court
collects the
officials.
money because they refer to it as the child's quote unquote services.
Mm.
And that's what they mean by that, is that they're collecting the Social Security money and they just refer to it as services. Once again, you have to keep it all underground and scrub the internet for any proof of anything. Otherwise, they would be caught. They're already getting caught anyways, but like it's very obvious and nobody committing crimes is going about bragging about it, you know? They're
Right.
Well,
trying to cover it up because they know they're criminals.
the really important message, though, about what's going on with people going to church and not seeing this, and, you know, if you look at your neighborhoods, so you look at the neighborhoods, and right now, the crime rates in my neighborhood have not gone up, right? So I don't know if I believe about all, so, but I know that other neighborhoods, there's the crime rates are going up, and but somehow many of the middle class who are doing well are, they're solvent, they can make their payments and stuff. They just don't see it. They literally
No,
don't see the enormity of this machine, but
no,
they're
not at
paying
all.
for it. And that's the gap that we need to bridge. That's what we're doing here today. We're
Hmm.
trying to bridge a gap between the reality of what's happening. I have stood on the state capitol steps, and across the street is the district court, and to my left on the west is the Supreme Court that has marble walls and two domed courtrooms that are rosewood paneling. It's and on the other side is the Denver Post, and I call that Babylon.
Ah,
This has been created in front of us to impose grandeur and credibility into what they're doing, and it's a facade. If you are not paying attention and you don't want to hear about this stuff, then you're paying for it.
you're part of the problem.
And well, yeah, and I tell people you've been notified. I, you know, I'm not going to go further with that, but I know why I do what I do,
Hmm.
because I can't not do it. My heart and my soul cannot say, this is not my problem.
Hmm.
So Debbie,
So
can we get back into the systemic issues that we can actually maybe help people out there listen to maybe give them some
my
tips and
first
ideas for how to
my
deal with
first piece of
this?
advice my first piece of advice for
Hmm.
parents is to write down every person. Get a big notebook and write down every person, every phone call. Do it in chronological order,
Right.
everything you do every day.
Dates and
what
times.
what dates and times and who you talk to and what they said. That is going to make your life easier, because the next thing we ask people to do when they become part of our nonprofit is to produce a timeline and to get their register of actions. So you can get your register of actions in your own case for free,
Mm.
and you can always just ask for the latest page, and then you don't have to have them print up. Some of these are 200, 300 pages of documents with the minute orders and all the meetings that you don't know happened and all that
Oh,
other stuff.
yep.
So those are my first two recommendations. What did you want to add?
I would say that those are very good starting points for the whole thing.
Mhm.
I generally tell all my clients that they need to conduct all business with anybody who's going to have they're going to have problems with, and even the ones they don't think they're going to have problems with. Do everything in email, so you end up with a record of all of your communications. They're date stamped and court admissible just as they are. This also ties into making ADA requests and other things that I often am
Oh,
working with.
talk about that. Yeah, what you can add to these cases.
Mhm.
Well, okay, so I'd like to start if we're going to do the ADA thing, because I think that's a definite point that we need to make here. I want to go into how the department actually targets parents originally, because that's important for how to attack your case to be able to defend against these things. Almost always, it starts with false allegations and slander of one parent by
Right.
another parent who's willing to lie about the other one. So
Or
you may
in
have said,
divorce,
"Oh,
or
I'll love you till the end of the time," but now this person
Yeah.
is your worst enemy, tied to you at the hip, basically, and they're going to use all the information they learned about you while they were with you
Mhm.
against you. It's a nice little feature. But
Right.
basically, they have a different game plan for both men and women.
we have 3 minutes.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay.
They basically, thanks though, Debbie, for keeping an eye on that. Um, they basically have different game plans for men versus women. With women, it seems to be, at least from my experience watching a lot of these cases, the women are often accused of substance abuse or mental health issues going into the whole thing, and both of which are actually covered under the ADA,
Mhm.
both of which are disabilities. Substance abuse also, as long as you're in treatment, substance abuse is covered under the ADA. If you're a disabled person, the ADA protects you as part of quote unquote a protected class, and discriminating against you is a quote unquote hate crime. So they take this into account with the whole thing. Debbie, would you please read from the memorandum of procedures about how they were working with the substance abuse, because you were just reading that line that you had highlighted. If you could
It
read
said
that one excerpt, that would be great.
chronic substance abuse, parentheses, prior treatment efforts have been unsuccessful. End parentheses.
Okay, so the treatment plan also, I wanted to add to that, treatment plans can't be done without the parents' involvement. You're supposed to be involved in the development of the treatment plan and then the execution of the treatment plan. They're supposed to include all parties. So if that hasn't happened, that's an inaccurate treatment plan and it's illegitimate. And that's part of what the issue was in that case in El Paso County Debbie was just talking about. But to go back to my point about the different targeting methods, they use substance abuse and mental health against moms. The reason why is it's very simple. Is from a PR standpoint, this mom's a crackhead. What else needs to be said? She doesn't get kids. She's a crackhead. Right. And other people listening to that won't look into it any further than that. They'll be like, well, the state's doing its job then, keeping these kids in a safer place than with a crackhead. But the truth of the matter is, kids in all but the most extreme abusive cases, and I know Debbie and I have been involved with a lot of the extreme ones, but in all but the most extreme cases, the state is more abusive than any abusive private party. And cumulatively with the whole group, they definitely are. But
And
it's also
exposes
under
the
debate
children.
case by case that the state's more abusive than most abusive parents. Obviously, the case where they're live streaming sexual assault with their own child, that's one of these extreme cases I'm saying kind of is the exception that kind of proves the rule, actually.
And
So,
I also,
oh, go ahead.
I just want to go on the record and say that this is not against the good foster parents. You know, there's good people everywhere. And I just want that to be the hallmark of my messages. You don't know who's good or bad until they're tested. And you know, to assume that these judges are good is a huge mistake.
Yeah.
And that these courts are good is a huge mistake. But we can't just, like, you know, hate a class of people because
Well,
they're
Debbie, to that point, I want to make a point that the system is so broken and rotten that you are enabling the racketeering and human trafficking by taking part in the system. Even if you're a good foster parent, you're actually kind of damaging the whole thing because the system needs to go. And if you're somebody on the street saying, well, I'm a good parent and I know I'm a good person and other people know that they're a good person, that gives redeemability back to this system that is unredeemable. It is
well, I think
beyond reform.
a lot of the foster parents know that there's really serious problems,
And
and
they're
that's why they
helping.
have.
They're helping save those kids from an otherwise horrible, torturous death or self-unaliving, because that's the other thing that happens to a lot of the kids in there. Let me finish up my last point here about the parents as they're targeted. So the men in these groups often get targeted as well, and they will be targeted normally on false DV charges, false sexual assault charges, or DHS will also pile on the substance abuse or mental health if those are applicable to the case at all. But the other big one for men is they'll say, well, he's just angry. I even had in my case, they accused me of not being angry enough. So I had to go through anger management courses so I could become more angry, which then, of course, they point a finger at you, go, well, look, now he's angry. So you can't win either way you do this. They play both sides of the coin on these things. But the point of the matter is it almost always starts out as a false allegation from the abusive party. So we go back to why does that happen? The problem is the entire organization and system is built upon mental illness itself. So like you see things like I do a lot of work with calling out the state workers for having narcissistic personality disorder traits and psychopathic traits. Okay. And so part of this I've devised back to the point that the entire system is narcissistic in nature. And I can prove this very easily in just a couple points. The first one being when you go to court, they divide you into custodial parents and non-custodial parents. This is 100% exactly the same dynamic as narcissistic parents using a golden child and scapegoat dynamic to divide the parents up. Here's the winner, here's the loser. The loser scapegoat kid, you get blamed for all the problems. The winner parent, you get all of the benefits. And who do we normally pick as the winner parent, the golden child? It's the one who's damaged and doing the worst for the kids. And this perpetuates the narcissism from the courts down into the families that they help. They indoctrinate the mental illness into the families, who then raise their kids in a narcissistic parenting structure created by the courts, forced
Mhm.
upon them by the courts. It's not even a choice that the kids have. They're forced into this. And the parents, once you get started with this, even as the healthy parent, the other parent starts the fight with you. Well, then what are your choices? Your choices are to fight back, defend yourself, or just ignore it and get run over and steamrolled.
Oh.
And like the only good choice is to fight back and try to do something about it and defend yourself. But we all know in a racketeering type of system, in a mafia state, the cards are definitely stacked against you, and you don't really have that opportunity, not in a fair context, at least. So my
Mhm.
next point about proving that this is a narcissistic system on its face is child support itself and foster care payments are all called entitlements.
Mhm.
Entitlement itself
Yeah.
is a narcissistic quality. And they prove it all the time by just being entitled to other people's kids.
Right.
That thought is not even a normal thought to a normal person, that I should be entitled to your children. That's a weird thing.
But
That's a
it's
Yeah,
mental
becoming
I
more
illness
agree.
common.
in action.
It's
Go ahead,
becoming
Debbie.
way more common. I mean, people don't even realize how a few, I mean, I think 42% of children live with both of their biological parents. That's the figure right now.
So it's the minority.
Yep.
Right. And this is because 1 in 3 kids in Colorado are wrapped up in this system. What happens when those kids grow up? They recreate the same crappy parenting experiences that they had when they were kids. And
Or
the whole
even if
thing
they're
revolves, the
even
whole
if
thing
they're trying,
revolves around childhood wounding. Go
even
ahead,
if they're
Debbie.
trying though, Nate, even if they're trying, the the CPS will say, well, you were a foster kid, you don't even know.
We can get into that if we have time to read the Robin Nacetta admission, because we have a written
I don't think
admission
we're
by a
going to. I,
caseworker.
I think we should probably try to wrap up so that,
Well, we want to get as much information out there as we can.
well, I don't
Um,
know, it's up to Mary Ann. Would do you want to have us come back, or
Oh, I'd love to have you guys come back. I mean, this was like a wealth of information.
we have lots more for you?
Oh, well, good.
Debbie, if it's not too much of a presser, and Marianne, could I quickly go over some of the
Sure.
ADA part? Because I think this is a very valuable way for people to fight back against a lot of this once you've been
Yeah,
slandered. That was the
definitely.
reason I wanted to go through that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, and actually, the whole thing about calling out the narcissism in the family courts is also very important, because there's a thing in Colorado called the Psychological Fitness for Duty Standard, which is a mental health standard for all state employees. And if somebody's not mentally healthy enough to hold a position, they're supposed to be removed under that standard. It's actually a law and not just a mental standard or a policy. It's actually a legislation. But they don't apply it very often, like they don't apply many of the laws, right?
Mhm.
But it still is a law. And so you can shame the people by calling them out for different narcissistic qualities when you find them. And it's very easy to do it. That's like shooting fish in a barrel. But just for the to try and keep an eye on the time here, we'll try to stick with just the ADA part for right now. But people should go Google the Psychological Fitness for Duty standard and look for them in your state too, if you don't live in Colorado, because there should be mental health standards in your state as well. But it all boils down to the basic point: people with antisocial personality disorders have no business working in social services. So even if you don't have a mental health standard in your state, you can still make the logical point that if they have antisocial personality disorders on display, then they should be held accountable and removed from their position in social services because they're antisocial. And by the very logic of the statement, they shouldn't be there. And
Exactly.
antisocial personality disorders include narcissism, psychopathy, and avoidant personality disorder, which needs to be seen as very dangerous too for the caseworkers, because all they have to do, if you're seeking emergency relief or an answer about your case or anything else like this, stonewalling you is extremely dangerous. So if
Mhm.
they're avoidant and don't want to answer emails because they're difficult or whatever weak excuse they have, that is costing you and endangering you and your family. And just
Mhm.
one last point about the mental health part: a personality disorder is defined as a behavior that's out of your control, that affects your primary relationships or your ability to do your work safely for yourself or others. At the point where anybody in their role as a DHS employee or family court judge or any of these other contractors is violating that, they're dangerous to you and your family. So they, by definition, have a personality disorder. And it's so culturally assumed that they'll all come in with that attitude. That's why I go forward with the term institutional psychopathic groupthink, because even if they didn't have that issue beforehand, the toxic culture requires them to act that way. Very much similar to how the police can make corrupt police officers, even when there's the one good apple, the rest of the bad apples will ruin the batch or the bunch, the bushel, I believe.
No, that
So,
was, go ahead.
Okay, so just for time, we're going to do lightning round through the ADA.
Okay.
Okay, so the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 is a federal law that specifically governs overall state and local laws. So that's the first point you want to come with. In Colorado, they were trying to write legislation to undermine what I was doing because I was advocating for help for a parent with the governor's office. So he got on the horn and they got the legislators and they started recrafting this bill. They crafted it, and the original draft is hilarious because it originally said he and his points and all this other stuff, and they crossed those out and they put in they and other things to make it, but it was clearly written for some guy giving them hassle about the ADA. And every submission of that bill was like a day or two right after I wrote a pretty nasty email to the governor's office. It was pretty, it's interesting how that works, but we'll go down that deep dive later. But they are very much into not wanting to believe that this is a law, trying to undermine it. But the fact of the matter is, the ADA is a federal law that governs over state and local laws. So even if they do that, it still doesn't apply. So people living with disabilities, as I was already covering, are part of a protected class, and discriminating against them is a hate crime by definition. Okay, you can, and what you use the ADA for is most people in the family courts have PTSD from being abused there. It creates PTSD, that type of abuse does. And because of that, there's another law that goes along with the ADA called the ADAAA. That's the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act of 2008. This law actually broadened the definition of a disability to include any internal impairment that impairs your basic day-to-day life. Okay, and PTSD is definitely part of that, but it also includes all kinds of internal impairments that we would call invisible disabilities, like diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer. It also covers substance abuse under the ADAAA. That's the law that they use. The part is the government here in Colorado, specifically even in their non-discrimination policy for the Department of Human Services, they list a lot of laws. They'll list like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is another one that will come into play here, the ADA, all these things, but they don't list the ADAAA. And this is so they can not use the broadened definition of what a disability is and not include PTSD. This allows them to just fall back to saying that the only way you're disabled is if you have an old school definition of disability, like limb loss, sight or hearing loss, something like that. That's a traditional disability, but it actually is all types of disabilities are covered. The other thing the ADAAA does is it allows parents to self-diagnose. So if you're like, well, I have autism, but nobody will diagnose me this way or whatever, well, you can self-diagnose. It helps to go get a professional diagnosis later, but you legally have the ability to self-diagnose. So you can state these things to a court where they sometimes will say the court doesn't recognize that you have a disability. Well, that's an illegal statement because the ADAAA applies everywhere the ADA does because it's an amendments act for the ADA, even if they don't want to entertain the idea of its existence.
Okay.
So, and I was saying before, as long as you're in treatment, substance abuse doesn't count as a thing you can take your parenting time away for. That's a completely illegal statement they've got in that memorandum of procedures. But once again, they don't care about the law so much.
No.
So, just to make things quick here to end up, parents can make ADA requests. So you come into this whole situation where you're like, I need to get some relief for me somehow. I can't even handle going to court. They're so crazy. I just had one just this last week where the attorney's treating me horrible. What do I do? Okay, so you're going to make an ADA request to be able to change the way the behavior is coming from the county or from these lawyers or whatever. And this works better, actually. Well, it works well privately or with government, but you need to know which title to use. So
Mhm.
Title II of the ADA is specifically for government functioning and government services. This is so you can receive equal services in the government as a disabled person, which if you can't go to court because you're so stressed out, you can ask for accommodations for your PTSD,
Mhm.
especially when they caused it and they're the ones triggering and exacerbating it.
Right, right.
Right.
I agree with
Okay.
that.
Hallelujah. Right. Okay. Title III of the ADA is for private organizations and individuals. So if you're dealing with an attorney, you're going to want to use Title III. And if you're dealing with a state agency or a judge, you're going to want to use Title II. Go ahead.
No, so like Title III, if you're dealing with an attorney, like if you have a complaint on an attorney who has violated your ADA rights, is that what you
You
mean?
could do that. You could do that too. But the way the example is working that I just had from last week, it was just conferring with emails. And she's like, how do I make this person less mean to me? Oh,
Ugh.
okay. Well, you can just do an ADA request and ask for trauma-informed care. So
Mhm.
trauma-informed care is a little buzzword that means the state needs to take accountability for how damaging the state itself and the services it provides are causing damage to the disabled individual. And
Mhm.
they need to adjust what they're doing in order so you don't become stressed out and triggered by their actions. So I said, you can make the ADA request, and here I'll call it out kind of by name how you can kind of do this.
Okay.
So if you had an issue, like say with the private attorney, you would say, by Title III of the ADA, I, as a disabled person, hereby request, and I should let me spell it all the way out for you guys. I'll get my official thing here. Um, as a disabled person by Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, I request A, B, and C. That's where you can add in whatever you need. It's going to be as personalized to you as your condition is and your situation. So in the case of this mom, it'd be, as a disabled person by Title III of the Americans with Disability Act of 1990, I request that you use trauma-informed care in all communications with me regarding this matter.
Mhm.
And then you just tell them, thank you for accommodating and being flexible to accommodate our request. Because you always want to be uh, civil and right, in case you were ever reading it back in front of a judge. That's how I
Mhm.
normally state it to folks. So if you make that ADA request, then they legally have to follow it, because
Mhm.
Title II of the ADA reads that, quote, all government facilities and personnel, I'll repeat it again, Marianne, shall accommodate any reasonable request made by a disabled person. End quote. So this is extremely powerful. It's a
Mhm.
federal law that governs all overall state and local laws, so they have to go by it. And so what you're saying here is all government facilities and personnel, meaning everybody. I don't care if you're a judge, whoever. If
Mhm.
Title II, right? If Title II, then it's all government facilities. And then shall accommodate. Shall is a specific word that means you're damn well gonna do it. Doesn't mean you get a choice. You shall do this. And so shall accommodate any reasonable request. So it boils down to the reasonability of the request. But invisible disabilities like PTSD are debatable and very speculative as far as what the issues would be that would solve your problem. Only the person that has the fear is going to truly know if their fear was satiated by whatever accommodations they made. So it's really back to that person to be able to make the determination there. What they will try to hit you with sometimes is, well, what you're asking for is too much for this department to provide, and it constitutes what they call, in quotes, an unreasonable hardship for the department. So if that's the case, they still have to talk to you and negotiate with you about your your ADA request. They can't just ignore it and they can't just dismiss it. They may try to dismiss it and say, well, it's an unreasonable hardship, but your answer for that can be, okay, well, reasonable hardships are installing a wheelchair ramp for a building that does not have wheelchair access.
Mhm.
The cost value for adding a wheelchair ramp is just short of $3,000. So if it takes less than a couple days or maybe a week of the individual you're requesting's time to fulfill whatever request you're making a perfectly reasonable request, because $3,000 is a reasonable amount of money to invest in a request.
Mhm.
And it goes even higher than that, because when you look at, I used to do traffic design in my old life before I lost my arm from
Mhm.
Department of Human Services. But
Mhm.
if you're building a traffic interchange, like with a traffic light, standard, these are millions of dollars for each project, for each intersection,
Mhm.
but each one has the little push buttons to go across the street. Those and wheelchair access ramps, they're all at a certain height for if you're in a wheelchair. All those are great, but none of those disabilities are actually what I have as a disabled person. So these are specific changes made for specific
Mhm.
disabilities that no one's even specifically requested as far as individuals. It's just standard treatment.
Mhm.
Well, to add all those features to a traffic intersection is hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Mhm.
So reasonable hardship really is such a speculative point. It doesn't hold much water. And if you use those as arguments, you can probably get whatever you're asking for. So things, I'll just rattle off some quick examples of what we can use, and then we'll try to wrap up. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so normal things that you can request are access to government services, like if you needed a wheelchair ramp, things like that, or use of a service animal, if you have a mental health service animal. But what we normally do in family court or DHS is I'll use an ADA request to expedite or relax time schedules. So there's sometimes where you need to have things hurry up to be able to make maybe a deadline at your work or a pay schedule or something like that, where you need to rush things forward. I also give people the option to relax it. And it seems kind of hypocritical when I'm first saying this, but PTSD victims and survivors oftentimes hate to be hurried because that's a big trigger for people with PTSD. So many
Mhm.
times you'll need to relax the schedule so you have time to be able to interpret the paperwork or whatever. So that's a very important aspect of it. And you may need to request relaxing the time schedule. Time schedule requests are almost always awarded because they cost the county nothing. It's hard to use the unreasonable request when it doesn't cost any money specifically to them. The other things that we often are using are special care or treatment for parents or your kids. If your kids have disabilities, you can advocate for your kids just as easily. You
Mhm.
can say, as you don't have to be a disabled person to advocate for a disabled person using an ADA request.
Mhm.
Because you can say, as my child is a disabled individual by Title II of the ADA, I request X, Y, and Z for my kid. So that's a very powerful statement too. And then another one that's very helpful is asking for different aids in a courtroom. Like they have a thing called the CART, which is it's CART in capital letters. I'm not exactly certain what the acronym is for, but
Okay.
it's an AV cart basically, where they bring it in so it does a transcription and types the words up on the screen so you could read in case you're hard of hearing. So you have that option to be able to request in a court hearing if you're having difficulty understanding things. You can also ask for help to understand documentation. That one's a little bit tricky though, because sometimes they'll assign you with a GAL, even to an adult.
Oh,
And the GAL is dangerous because they will do what the state wants
yes.
rather than what you want. They are not a client driven attorney.
Mm.
They'll do what they think is best. And 9 times out of 10, they won't respect your disabilities as a result of it. So, but you could also make an ADA request to not have a GAL. That's an option
Mhm.
too.
Mhm.
Although part of the thing they try and fight here is you can't make ADA requests to change the outcome of a case.
Mm.
So you get into some ground there, but once again, it's all speculative. So it's a negotiation at that point. And if we had more time, we could go into some of my other techniques I use for that. But the other things you can request is make sure you have your glasses or hearing aids or anything like that that you need for a court hearing to make sure that you can get a fair hearing. And then one of the coup de grace to use for this is to request that the departments only respond in accordance with their mission statements. And this is hilarious because the ADA gives you full access to government services. Well, their government services are very clearly written in their mission statement, but most of the times those are just outright lies because, like, the Department of Human Services in Colorado says, we're the people who help people. We
Oh.
help families thrive. And we all know they do the exact opposite of these things. And so, like, if you say by Title II of the ADA, I request that you guys answer only in accordance with your mission statement, all of a sudden that changes the outcome of lots of things, and it puts them in a sticky wicket, we'll say.
Mm.
Once again, they're illegal by definition, so they'll try all kinds of ways to work out around it, but ultimately they are committing discrimination. All
All the
right, tag
time.
off.
All the
Yeah.
time. Hey, how can people reach you, Nate, if they have a question?
Okay. Well, the PALADN Media group is just getting started, but we do have a Substack going. And so you can reach us at paladinmedia.substack.com. And you can also email us at paladinmedia@protonmail.com. And you can email either Debbie or myself there. I can forward stuff
Okay.
to Debbie as well. And just to be clear, PALADN is spelled without an I. It's Parental Alienation Legal Abuse Defense Network. So PALADN.
And they can reach Debbie Carroll there too, right?
Yes. And Debbie has other information for consideration, though I'm sure she'd like to promote.
Um, I actually would prefer at this point, because I can't remember whether it's Debbie Carr or Debbie Carroll. And so anyway, just go ahead with that and we'll update it if we need to.
Okay. Hey, don't jump off. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these courtrooms. I am your host, Marianne Petrie, and you can find me on Spotify, YouTube, Apple iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google, and other platforms I don't know about. Again, feel free to buy me a coffee to help keep this podcast going. I really thank you, Nate Munro and Debbie Carroll, for coming on and speaking out. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
for
for
the
having us.
opportunity.
Definitely have you back.